Today's story is like something straight out of a movie. But the shocking truth is, it's 100% real. This tale from the depths of history proves that when a woman seeks revenge for love, she can move mountains. Or in this case, destroy entire kingdoms. What you're about to hear will show you the terrifying power of a woman's vengeance. How one legendary figure brought Europe to its knees and rewrote history itself. And the most chilling part? Why historians still call this the most brutal revenge of all time. Our story begins in 10th century Ukraine, though it looked nothing like today. Back then, these lands were part of Kievan Rus, a realm where blood ran thicker than wine, and betrayal was met with fire. Under what was then called Kievan Rus, we find a tribal society deeply rooted in pagan traditions. The ruler of these Slavic tribes was Prince Igor. During one of his journeys among his people, his gaze fell upon a striking 15-year-old girl of Scandinavian O. The prince became utterly obsessed, so transfixed by her beauty that he would stare at her for hours, lost in thought, until he finally resolved to marry her and claim her for himself. Indeed, he went to her personally and proposed marriage. Of course, she didn't object in the slightest. On the contrary, she was overjoyed. In their culture, it was considered an honor for any maiden to marry a nobleman close to the prince's rank, let alone to be chosen by the prince himself. The wedding proceeded, while the gossip mongers and envious courtiers whispered behind their hands. Now this Olga's life will transform. Roses and gold, jewels and servants, she'll want for nothing as the prince's bride. Little did they imagine the trials Princess Olga would face. But let us set aside Olga and Igor for a moment and turn to the Drevlians, one of the most powerful tribes in the region, who held considerable influence. This tribe was required to pay tribute to Prince Igor in exchange for the autonomy he granted them. But the prince, consumed by greed, thought to himself, "Why should I continue granting them privileges when they fear me already? I have every right to increase their taxes year after year." True to his thoughts, Igor marched to the Drevlians with his guards and entourage. "Hear me, Drevlians," he declared. "Starting next year, your tribute payments shall increase, and you will pay it promptly, unless, of course, you dare object. Challenge me if you dare. Let any man here oppose my decree." Igor's voice rang with the arrogance of unchecked power. The Drevlians burned with silent fury, their knuckles white as they recognized the prince's exploitation. Yet not a single word of protest passed their lips. "As you command, my prince," they answered through gritted teeth, not in agreement, but in the terrible calm before the storm. Or as the ancients warned, "A silence that lasts an age will one day break with thunder." For a month, their hatred simmered behind obedient bows and eyes dark with vengeance. Meanwhile, Olga's world bloomed like a storybook romance. Igor's doting affection, the birth of their heir, the realm rejoicing at the royal christening. None could imagine the blood price soon to be paid. When the year's cycle turned full, Prince Igor marched again to the Drevlians, this time alone, to extract the doubled tribute he had decreed. In his fatal arrogance, he dismissed his retinue with a wave. "Stay and guard my wife and heir. What need have I of protection among these cowed dogs? I go to grind their faces into the earth and take what is mine." Yet the moment the Drevlians saw their tormentor standing vulnerable before them, their pent-up fury erupted. Like wolves upon a stray buck, they dragged him to the sacred grove. With ritual precision, the Drevlians dragged Igor between two ancient oaks. They bound his legs to each trunk, his arms stretched wide like some pagan offering, until his body formed a living cross against the twilight. Then came the saw. Its teeth bit deep where spine met ribs, parting flesh with wet, cracking protests. As Igor's screams curdled the air, they peeled his ribs outward, a grotesque wingspan of bone and sinew, finally yanking his lungs through the ruin of his back. The blood eagle complete, they proclaimed to the assembled tribes, "Behold your prince's fate." When the news reached Olga, her mourning cloak hid steel beneath its folds. She would weep no tears where enemies might see, not while her son's throne stood unsecured. With ice in her veins and fire in her heart, the princess regent took the reins of Rus, her vengeance waiting like a half-drawn arrow. A Drevlian's fatal miscalculation. Flushed with victory, the tribesmen celebrated Igor's gruesome death and turned their greed toward the throne. "The path to power lies clear before us," their chieftains declared. "What threat does a mere widow pose? We'll wed her to our own prince and claim the realm through marriage." Approving this plan, they dispatched envoys to Olga's court. At dawn, these messengers stood before the princess, their words dripping with false contrition. "Noble princess, we bring tidings of peace from the Drevlian people. They seek to atone for Prince Igor's unfortunate demise. By uniting our houses in marriage, we might heal these wounds and bind our lands as one." Their smiles hid daggers, ignorant of the storm they'd awakened. Olga's deadly hospitality. With a radiant smile that concealed venomous intent, Olga played the gracious host. "You honor me with this proposal, coming all this way to court me." Her performance was flawless, the very picture of a docile noblewoman. The envoys swelled with pride, exchanging smug glances. Just as we predicted, they thought. A woman's weak heart bends easily. As they reveled in the palace's luxuries, Olga summoned her soldiers under cover of night. Dig a pit so deep, the earth itself gasps. By dawn, her men stood sweating over a gaping chasm. Then came her masterstroke, a royal procession where ambassadors would be carried atop a great wooden platform. Olga's pit of vengeance. 4 armored soldiers lifted the wooden platform like a royal palanquin, carrying the smug envoys aloft. Unaware, they rode to their graves. The procession moved toward the gaping pit, where the earth waited hungrily. Then, darkness. The platform tilted violently, sending the ambassadors screaming into the abyss. Dirt rained down as Olga's soldiers began burying them alive, their shrieks muffled under cascading soil. From the pit's edge, Olga's laughter rang out, a sound like shattering ice. "How does our royal hospitality please you now?" Her eyes burned with primal triumph as the last twitching hand disappeared beneath the earth. But this was only her first move in the game of vengeance. Olga's deadly masquerade. A cold fury burned within Olga as she listened to their proposal. "You murder my husband, then dare ask me to marry one of your dogs?" she thought, her face a mask of regal composure. With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the dangerous smile of a she-wolf circling prey, she replied, "What honor you do me? Of course I accept this generous offer for the peace of our lands." Her voice dripped with poisoned honey. But night falls early, and the roads teem with wolves. Stay as royal guests tonight. We shall treat you as the noble ambassadors you are. The trap was set. Olga's deadly invitation. Olga's letter reached the Drevlian prince, who read it with triumphant glee. "Rejoice," he declared. "The princess asks only for our finest nobles. What could be simpler? Prepare our most honored lords at once." And so the Drevlians assembled their elite, the very men who had orchestrated Igor's brutal execution, and sent them in a grand procession to Olga's court. When they arrived, the princess greeted them with chilling courtesy. "Before we discuss marriage, you must cleanse yourselves. A royal bath to wash away the dust of your journey." Her smile was serene, her eyes glacial. The bathhouse doors closed behind them with a fateful echo. The bathhouse inferno. "Rest from your journey's weariness," Olga purred, her voice honeyed with false warmth. "Enjoy the royal baths, then we shall speak of alliances." The Drevlian nobles, swollen with pride, entered the grand bathhouse, a marble chamber steaming with scented waters. As they lounged in the pools, boasting of their coming power, Olga gave the signal. Iron doors slammed shut. Then, fire. Torrents of flaming pitch cascaded from hidden ducts. The screams began as flesh blistered, then ceased as the oxygen fled. Within minutes, the mightiest of Drevlia were naught but charred bones and drifting ash. Olga inhaled the smoke like perfume. Now, she thought, the true reckoning begins. Olga's final gambit. With cold precision, Olga penned her most audacious letter yet. "Your most noble emissaries have arrived safely and now enjoy every royal comfort alongside their predecessors. I accept your marriage proposal on one condition. Send me 5,000 of your finest warriors to honor my late husband's memorial feast. When they come bearing candles for Prince Igor's rites, I shall wed you before all the assembled host." The ink dried like clotting blood. The feast of the damned. Though the prince found Olga's request strange, 5,000 men? He dismissed his doubts. What threat is a grieving widow, he scoffed. Let her play at funeral rites if it soothes her woman's heart. And so he sent his elite, warriors draped in wolf pelts, advisors bearing ceremonial axes, all 5,000 stumbling into Olga's trap. The memorial feast sprawled across the great hall. Tables groaned with spiced meats and honeyed wines. As the Drevlians gorged themselves, their cups never emptying, their laughter grew slurred, then ceased altogether. The wine, thick with poisons, worked swiftly. The great purge, as the drugged wine seized their limbs, the Drevlians could only watch in paralyzed horror, while Olga's warriors unsheathed their swords. One by one, 5,000 necks met cold steel. Chieftains, generals, and counselors alike, their heads tumbling like rotten fruit before the smirking princess. Olga decorated her palace walls with their skulls, a grisly mosaic whispering, "This is the price of regicide." Yet still, her wrath burned unsated. Olga's final reckoning. With her elite forces annihilated, Olga marched upon the heart of Drevlian territory at the head of a merciless host. The tribe, bereft of warriors, their leadership reduced to ashes, could only grovel as her army descended. "Mercy, great princess," they wailed, pressing foreheads to blood-soaked earth. "We beg you, spare our women and children. By your husband's memory, we swear eternal fealty." Their voices cracked like dry twigs beneath a boot. Olga's sword remained sheathed. Her vengeance demanded a far darker price. The firebird's stratagem, Olga's lips curled as the terrified Drevlians brought forth their offerings. Over 500 pigeons and doves, clutched in trembling hands. "Rest easy," she purred. "My vengeance is complete. I ask only these birds." The tribesmen exchanged bewildered glances. What madness was this? No gold, no heads on spikes, just feathers. By nightfall, Olga's artisans had fastened sulfur-soaked linen to each tiny leg. As the first torch touched flax, history's most ingenious massacre took wing. The inferno unleashed. Olga's hands worked methodically, tying sulfur-soaked cloth to each bird's legs, the volatile bundles bristling like deadly ornaments. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she released the flock back toward Drevlian homes, their wings beating against the twilight. 500 birds, 500 tiny arsonists. The conflagration began in moments. Flames erupted across the thatched roofs of the Drevlian capital. The firestorm, so vast, Olga could feel its heat licking at her face from miles away. Panicked survivors burst into the streets, only to find Olga's warriors waiting with drawn blades. "Choose," her captain's voice boomed over the crackling pyres. "The fire's embrace or our steel." Olga's triumphant return. A chilling laughter escaped Olga's lips as she surveyed the smoldering ruins. "At least I granted them a choice," she mused, "to burn or to bleed. A mercy, really. with an entire tribe extinguished, their bloodlines severed forever by a woman's wrath. The princess turned her army homeward. Her legend spread like wildfire across Europe and beyond, whispered in equal parts awe and terror. Even the emperor in Constantinople took notice. Intrigued by this formidable queen, he summoned her to his court. There, amidst the glittering domes of Byzantium, envoys pressed her to abandon her pagan gods and embrace the cross. Just setting stop. Intrigued by this formidable queen, he summoned her to his court. There, amidst the glittering domes of Byzantium, envoys pressed her to abandon her pagan gods and embrace the cross. And again, he was visited by the emperor. Her legend spread like wildfire across Europe and beyond. Whispered Olga's conversion. Within the grandeur of Constantinople's holy sanctuaries, Olga found herself drawn to the Christian faith. Its structured theology, a stark contrast to the pagan traditions of her ancestors. This speaks to reason, she concluded, though Islam remains the one true faith as revealed in the Quran. This day I have perfected for you your religion. 5:3. Yet in her limited understanding, Christianity appeared more coherent than the idolatry she had known. Baptized as Helena, she returned to Kiev with fervor, commanding the destruction of pagan idols and instituting mass baptisms. Under her rule, the Russian people embraced Eastern Orthodoxy, their conversion marking the dawn of a new spiritual era, though forever shadowed by the blood-soaked path their queen had walked to reach it. The legacy of Saint Olga. Under Olga, now baptized as Helena, the Russian people embraced Orthodox Christianity en masse. She transformed from a warrior princess into a revered saint, with the church elevating her as the patroness of widows, a title that, in their flawed belief system, nearly equated her with the apostles, though we know none can truly approach the status of Allah's chosen messengers. This complex woman, whose life was steeped in both bloodshed and evangelism, passed away in 969 AD. Yet her name endures across Eastern Europe. Olga remains etched in history books and church hymns alike. But was she the only royal woman to wield such terrifying power? As the annals of Madagascar will soon reveal, a new reign of terror. Olga was far from the only queen to bathe her reign in blood. Centuries later, in 1788, another ruthless ruler emerged, this time on the sun-scorched island of Madagascar. Our story begins with a poor peddler, a father struggling to feed his family with the meager earnings from his rickety cart. One evening, while navigating the labyrinthine alleys of the capital, he overheard two shadowy figures whispering of a plot to assassinate the king during the next day's festivities. Without hesitation, the desperate man rushed to the palace gates, his warning on his lips. "I must speak to the king. Tonight." The king's close call. At first, the guards scoffed at the peddler's urgency. "You demand an audience with the king?" One sneered, eyeing his patched robes. "Think your family to waltz in unannounced? His Majesty doesn't waste time on street vendors." Undeterred, the man hissed, "Then take this message. I overheard two men plotting. Tomorrow, at the reception, they mean to kill him." The guards' laughter died in their throats. Within hours, spies flooded the capital. The would-be assassins were dragged from their hideout by dawn. When the king demanded to reward the peddler, his life and his daughter's destiny would change forever. The rise of Queen Ranavalona. The guards finally tracked down the humble peddler who had exposed the assassination plot. As a reward, the king arranged for his daughter Rana to marry the crown prince, though she would become his 13th wife. Despite the prince's 12 previous marriages, it was Rana alone who bore him his first and only heir, Prince Radama I, by divine decree. After the king's death, and years later, the prince's passing, Rana seized power as regent for her young son. But she was no mere placeholder ruler. The cunning queen established her own private army, 300,000 strong, separate from the kingdom's main forces. Imagine the terror of a monarch who, the reign of terror, Queen Ranavalona's private army, a staggering force of 300,000 loyal soldiers, became the iron fist of her rule. She spun a vast web of spies across Madagascar, turning neighbor against neighbor. Her justice was merciless. The poison test. Any subject accused of treason, even on mere suspicion, faced her infamous trial by tangena poison. The accused would drink the lethal concoction. If they died, see, God confirms their guilt. If they survived, Allah has granted you new life. I pardon you. Fear became her currency. She imposed crushing taxes and severed Madagascar from the outside world, a hermit kingdom decades before North Korea's isolation. Even travel between provinces. The Queen's twisted justice, Ranavalona's reign of terror, reached new heights of cruelty. She perfected punishments designed to break both body and spirit. The chicken skin ordeal. An accused prisoner would be presented with a plate containing the freshly flayed skin of 3 chickens, a bowl of poison-laced water. Eat the flesh of the unclean. Drink the judgment of the crown. This grotesque ritual alone claimed 5% of Madagascar's population. The day the nation dared to hope, When news spread that the queen lay dying from a grave illness, celebrations erupted across the island. People danced in the streets, believing their nightmare had ended, until the palace gates burst open. There she stood, alive. Did you miss me? The monsters return. The celebrations died in their throats as Ranavalona reclaimed her throne, more deranged than ever. The people's whispered lament, "Our joy was premature," became a national epitaph. Her madness now had a system. For apostates, boiling alive until flesh sloughed off bones. For traitors, public sawings in half before jeering crowds. Year after year, the atrocities continued, not for 1 or 3, but 33 bloody years, until even her own son, now grown, watched in horror as his mother butchered their people without mercy. The son's rebellion. Witnessing his mother's unchecked brutality, the crown prince resolved to end her tyranny, even if it meant betraying his own blood. In secret, he reached out to French officials. Take Madagascar's riches, but leave its wealth to the people. Free us from this madness. Yet Renavalona's web of spies caught every whisper. When the letter was placed before her, the queen's hands trembled, not with rage, but devastating hurt. "You, my own son?" She sighed, the parchment crumbling in her grip. "I cannot punish the flesh of my flesh. Go, but know this. Every foreigner in our land will pay for your betrayal." That night, the executions began. The final bloodbath. Stung by her son's betrayal yet unable to harm him, Ranavalona unleashed her wrath where she could, on every foreign soul in Madagascar. You break a mother's heart, boy, then watch what breaks in return. The island ran red. European traders dragged through streets, Indian merchants flayed alive, Arab scholars boiled in their own inkpots. When the massacre ended, Madagascar's cosmopolitan fabric had been torn apart. The queen, now a hollow-eyed specter, ruled over a graveyard kingdom until her death at 83. The numbers still shock. 1833, 5 million people. 1839, 2 million survivors. 70% of her subjects gone. Only Allah's mercy prevented total annihilation.